This year, Malaysians look back on half a century as a modern nation. In 50 years, there have been joyous celebrations, even fun in high places.
The 60s is the most liberal period and the most secular time for the country.
But there has been turmoil and violence.
Saya nampak mayat tu masih ada di jalan raya dan darah tu masih mengalir.
Out of conflict emerged a massive push towards development. The forging of international alliances and bonds. Malaysians have never lost their sense of humour.
With Dr. M, the nose became bigger and bigger, and eventually when it became big, it looked funny to me, and it looked like him.
There has been high political drama.
No, I have decided.
And towering achievements.
Saya bangga untuk mengatakan bahawa saya bermula sebagai seorang gadis kampung dan berjaya pergi ke level yang lebih tinggi.
It was the most magical, spectacular moment of my life. I didn't want to come back.
It's been a historical roller coaster, so fasten your seatbelts and experience Malaysia through the decades. By 1960, Malaya has been an independent nation for just 3 years. The first Prime Minister and father of independence, Tunku Abdul Rahman, fears that the threat of communism could easily engulf the region and endanger Malaya. In 1961, he proposes incorporating other territories, and after 2 years of negotiations, Malaya becomes Malaysia, with the addition of British colonies of Singapore and Sabah and Sarawak in North Borneo. On 16th September 1963, hundreds of thousands of people all over the new enlarged nation celebrate the formation of Malaysia. More than 20,000 people gather at the Merdeka Stadium. A flag for an enlarged Malaya was designed years before in 1949. Now, with the formation of Malaysia, it is unfurled at last, with new stripes and additional points to the star to represent all the states. Tunku Abdul Rahman calls on Malaysians to defend the flag of the new nation with all their strength, and even when necessary, with their lives. The celebrations are being held concurrently in Kuala Lumpur and in all the states of the new Malaysia. 13-year-old Rosna Aksa, who had won a bravery award the year before, is chosen to release the first of 101 pigeons to symbolize independence and hopes for peace.
Saya rasa banggalah saya terpilih tu. Tidak semudah itu dan saya, ibu saya berkata ini sejarah ni, ada sejarah ni, dia kata pandanglah kepada semua yang ada depan kita.
In Kuala Lumpur, capital of the new nation, it's party time.
We heard that there's a big celebration in Kuala Lumpur. Everybody from Penang come to enjoy see the celebration. It's a very beautiful place, KL all the time.
Thousands of people have come to enjoy the procession.
Malam itu cukup meriah dan suasananya cukup riang. Jadi perarakan itu saya rasa tak kurang daripada 30 buah lori meriah.
But as the celebrations end, the Tunku faces the wrath of his regional neighbours, Indonesia and the Philippines.
Indonesia regarded the whole formation of Malaysia as a neo-colonialist plot, something that the British had concocted with the Tunku, and therefore they opposed the Federation of Malaysia. And as a result, they carried out what was called confrontasi or confrontation.
British and Commonwealth troops rallied to Malaysia's defence.
Indonesian confrontasi was a serious challenge to the Federation of Malaysia, largely because not only was the Union new, but the country did not have the real capacity to defend itself, as it were. And so during that time, we find that Malaysia relied a lot on the British support for its defence.
But despite the threat from her neighbours, the new Malaysia is already moving forward. For the new nation needs new symbols. Just weeks after Malaysia Day, a grand new 18-storey Parliament building in the modern international style is completed. The first session of Parliament is held in the new building on 2nd November 1963. New members of the House of Representatives from Singapore, Sarawak and Sabah are sworn in. In the new nation, there is a fragile sense of optimism, but the Tunku celebrates in his own way.
We were able to enjoy life in the sense that there were no inhibition at all. We can do what we want, and we were looking toward the progress of the country.
In the 60s, we started with nothing, practically nothing. And so we had to build up this base, infrastructure, financial framework. We don't even have a local bank. We had to put together a public service that can implement things.
Another groundbreaking public service is television.
Mula-mula TV keluar tu, pukul berapa nak mula tu, kita dah tunggu dah depan tu. Masa itu black and white, hitam putih. Tak ada colour. Oh, seronok.
There was only one channel and transmission is for 4 hours.
Saya masih ingat televisyen mula-mula masuk, kita sampai sanggup lah. Abang ramai tengok TV rumah orang. Dah siap dah dengan makanan, macam kita pergi tengok wayang lah.
And Malaysians could also connect to the wider world at the brand new Subang Airport.
Tunku saw Subang Airport as the gateway into Malaysia and for the citizens to finally be connected to the rest of the world.
Inside Subang, an impressive concrete structure evoking a forest canopy symbolises the ambitions of the time. At the end of August, the official opening and a visitors' day is held. A massive traffic jam built up on the approach roads as countless Malaysians clamoured to see the new airport. But even as people celebrated at Subang, relations between the Tunku and Singapore Chief Minister Lee Kuan Yew plummeted. That same month, the Tunku demands a political divorce, and Singapore went its own way. But there was better news on another front. Since the formation of Malaysia, the confrontasi war with Indonesia has sputtered on. But in 1966, with the ousting of Sukarno by General Suharto, the Tunku's Deputy Prime Minister Tun Razak at last signed a peace treaty with Indonesia, bringing confrontasi to an end. With its strong tradition of anti-communism, Malaysia has a key role in the region, a fact acknowledged by President Lyndon Johnson when he visited in 1966.
I feel that I know you because Malaysia, like the United States, is a federation of states which were once colonies of Great Britain. And because Malaysia is, like the United States, a nation of many diverse peoples. I have come here to learn from you. I know that your nation is a model of what may be done by determined and far-sighted men in Southeast Asia.
Such powerful and appreciative visitors showed that Malaysia was becoming an increasingly important player in the international community. But just as the Tunku and Malaysians revelled in their new status, blood flows on the streets of Kuala Lumpur. 1969, May 10th, and Malaysians go to the polls in a general election. 6 years have passed since the Tunku's grand design of a united Malaysia was made real. A lot has changed. When the election results come in, it is immediately clear that the Tunku's Alliance Party has lost ground. Many Chinese Malaysians voted for opposition parties, and when the results come in, some aggressively celebrate their success. These demonstrations anger many Malays.
the alliance won, but they won with a lesser majority, and they get very worried about these things. And when they were teased about these things, they responded very violently, and that led to the riots.
On 13th May, this frustration spills onto the streets of Kuala Lumpur. Hundreds are killed.
Saya nampak mayat tu masih ada di jalan raya dan darah tu masih mengalir.
Burning at night, non-stop. Sentu burning, Kampung Baru burning, behind Datuk Keramat all burning.
Alarmed and taken by surprise, the government orders a round-the-clock curfew throughout the state of Selangor, which at that time still included Kuala Lumpur.
Sekarang keadaan darurat, semua sudut rumah harap bertenang, keadaan terkawal.
Then on 14th May, a state of emergency is declared. A few days later, on 16th May, Parliament is suspended indefinitely, and Tunku Abdul Rahman sets up a National Operations Council that will rule the country by decree. His deputy Tun Abdul Razak becomes Director of Operations.
While there was a government headed by the Tunku Abdul Rahman, there was a separate entity called the NOC, which was the effective government machinery, that control the situation both in security and in non-security terms.
The riots have taken the Tunku by surprise. His influence was waning. The year after the riots, the father of independence resigns. His natural successor was his former deputy, Tun Abdul Razak, who was already managing the aftermath of the riots. Backed by a new National Consultative Council, which includes representatives of most of the political parties and communities.
For 2 years, the NOC ran the country. But what is remarkable, I think, is that the NOC had a vision or had a plan. They will relinquish control of the country and allow the country to return to the democratic practices that had existed before that. So this was I would say, an interruption.
By February 1971, the emergency is over and Tun Razak returns power to Parliament. But Malaysia would never be the same nation again.
Although it was a tragedy, we learned a lot. We learned how to handle race relations, and we also learned how to understand the feelings of people and to take into consideration their feelings in order to shape our policies.
For Tun Razak, it is essential to come up with a plan that would foster national unity. The new Economic Policy, or NEP, is launched in June 1971. The 20-year plan has a twofold agenda of poverty eradication and society restructuring. Tun Razak is aware that the biggest hurdle still facing Malaysia is underdevelopment, an old problem that had never been completely solved.
1/2 of the population were classified as poor. 1/2.
For the Prime Minister, it was essential first to lift these poorer Malaysians out of poverty.
The elimination of poverty regardless of race. This was set out as the first one.
Although the NEP was intended to be race-blind and would not favour any one race, the statistical evidence showed that it was Malays who suffered most from poverty and were often trapped in traditional economic roles. Their needs were prioritised.
You can identify a person's race from his father's occupation. If you are Indian, your father would work in an estate or at the railways. If your father is Malay, he's a farmer, largely or civil servant. If you are Chinese, your father will be a professional or a businessman.
The Malays were only involved in farming and fishing, and the Chinese doing business, and the Indians in the estate. He tried to break up all these kind of activities.
Pelancaran dasar ekonomi baru seperti kita maklum adalah tindakan tegas untuk mengatasi kedua-dua masalah ini dan seterusnya menjaminkan perpaduan rakyat dan kestabilan negara untuk masa hadapan.
Tun Razak is at the forefront of the campaign. He galvanizes the Federal Land Development Agency, or FELDA, and travels all over Malaysia to push forward the new policy.
He would never sit still, go to the villages and see what the conditions were like, so that he would be able to at least formulate some kind of solution for these people.
He wanted to create wealth for the rural Malays. I think that's the most important thing that he did. And that by providing the schemes and the incentives so that the people could strive to do better.
But the problem isn't only internal poverty. The Malaysian economy is still dominated by foreign owners, especially British ones.
The Malays own 2% of the corporate sector. But at that time, the biggest owners of the corporate sector was not the Chinese. 60% was owned by foreigners.
It is time to give the economy back to Malaysians.
We decided to buy them back from London. We started with the tin companies, then one by one of all the plantation companies.
But Tun Razak wants to make sure that the entire nation benefits.
Once they were brought back, we put them under unit trust. So that's what we did.
Freed from its former colonial owners, the country's economy surges forward.
From the end of the 60s to the end of the 70s, we had unprecedented growth rate because we spent 10 years preparing for it, and we were ready. We just pushed, and it went up.
Tun Razak not only hopes to unite the country internally, but to reshape Malaysia's relations with her powerful neighbours. The Malayan Communist Party has been a thorn in the country's flesh for years. In May and June of 1974, Tun Razak flies to Beijing to seek a diplomatic rapprochement with Malayan Communist Party's backers.
Tun Razak's visit to China in 1974 was significant. Malaysia is one of the few countries that actually faced a real communist insurrection. It was incited or had support from China. What was the enemy now can be considered a friend.
China didn't have many friends at that time. And being the first ASEAN leader to pave the way for friendship, China definitely appreciated very, very much.
The highlight of Tun Razak's 6-day visit to China is a 90-minute meeting with Chairman Mao Zedong. He takes the opportunity to broach the problem of the continuing communist insurgency in Malaysia.
He put a question to Mao Zedong. You are an expert on guerrilla warfare. We have this problem back home. Can you give us some advice? How do we deal with them?
Mao's reply surprises everyone.
He said, you are in the open. You are a legitimate government. The communists were in the dark. So be patient. The problem would disappear and be solved.
Tun Razak's visit is the first step towards freeing the region from the constant threat of war. It would take another 15 years before the Malayan communists agreed to end the insurgency. Back in Malaysia, a young cartoonist is also making waves. His scenes of Malaysian life is a huge hit. His name is Muhammad Nur Khalid, better known as Lut.
I had to reach out to those people who read the newspapers. And so I would choose subjects that are very familiar to people. You know, I started off with weddings. I would draw about soccer. I would draw about eating habits. I would draw about bus ride. Whatever it is that we experience. And I enjoyed that.
Then in 1975, Lut is on hand for one of the biggest fights of the decade.
Kuala Lumpur was the center, and you know, international stars come here. We were very proud. And then when we saw Muhammad Ali coming down from the plane, and he looked so good, you know, and we were so happy. We look forward to the fight. I was still a reporter, and I had to cover him too. You know, I went to see where Muhammad Ali was staying. We went to cover 24 hours.
In that time, Muhammad Ali was the sportsman, you know. Every time he's got a fight, it was so hype. I stood on the chair while he was passing me. I just tapped on his back. I got sweat on my hands. And I said, "Champ, champ." Then he looked at me. That was the greatest thing for me.
The heavyweight champion of the world, Muhammad Ali! Muhammad Ali! Ali!
Everyone want to see Muhammad Ali because he's float like a butterfly, he sting like a bee. It's a very sharp punch. The whole crowd there, about 80% except for Muhammad Ali. Nobody know about who is Joe Butler.
In front of a crowd of 10,000 in Merdeka Stadium, Muhammad Ali charms the crowd. The match is telecast live on national television and brings the nation to a standstill.
Unanimous decision for Muhammad Ali! Muhammad Ali sedang beruntung.
A year later, it is the Prime Minister Tun Razak who loses a long battle with leukemia. His illness is known to few. On 14th January 1976, the Prime Minister dies suddenly in London. He is just 53. There are emotional scenes when the plane carrying his remains lands at Subang Airport.
Every one of us were mourning the loss, not only to us but to the country as a whole.
Segala sakit yang ada ni dirahsiakan oleh Tun Razak sendiri. Dia tak mahu rakyat tahu apa masalah dia. Jadi ini yang menimbulkan rakyat rasa cukup rindu, sayang kepada dia.
It was a very sad day. I remember I cried. It was felt by so many.
It seems a perilous moment for the still young nation.
You always thought your father was going to be around for a long, long time. So when he died, it was a great shock to us. He was much loved, by the people. So that gave us a sense of pride.
Under Tun Razak, Malaysia has steadied its course, despite many tribulations. After Tun Razak's sudden death, Hussein On steps in.
He had a stern disposition, no nonsense kind of thing. So he just carried on with the kind of things that he didn't want to tinker and change things.
Hussein On was preoccupied with improving race relations and is remembered today as the father of unity. He also continued Tun Razak's policy of seeking allies in the region. But the elderly Hussein On serves only 5 years. In 1981, he retires due to ill health. More dramatic changes are now in the making. On's successor is an outspoken former doctor from Kedah, whose political ascent heralds a new era for Malaysia. His name is Mahathir Mohamad. 20 years after the formation of Malaysia, the nation faces a decade of astonishing change under a new Prime Minister. From the start of his tenure, Mahathir challenges Malaysians to embrace the future, a future of hard work.
At 3 o'clock, I look out the window, I saw people leaving the office and going home. That is why I decided that we will clock the time that they come in and the time they go off, so that people will give full value to the money we pay them.
Saya pun kena buat dulu macam tu. Sebab kadang-kadang ada yang 3 hari tak datang pun ada. Jadi dia kata, datang, ada tadi tak nampak. Cakap aja, tapi tak ada.
The Prime Minister is impatient for Malaysia to move ahead. Mahathir's drive is fodder for cartoonist Lut. Initially, he had trouble getting Mahathir's look right.
At first, I drew him squarish, His head was squarish, and the nose became bigger and bigger. And eventually, when it became big, it looked funny to me, and it looked like him. Although he's a good-looking man, how can you make his face funny? Some of the people close to him did tell me that he did complain. Why does he draw my nose too big? I say that's my style. But when you look at the drawing, the caricature, who is it? Well, that's Dr. M. Oh, there you are. So yeah, it's one way of my interpretation.
One of Dr. Mahathir's primary objectives is to end dependency on the West.
Even in the past, Malaya was much closer to Great Britain. Mahathir began to steer a path that seemed to be less, not so close to Britain, but then to develop other kinds of relationships.
Mahathir introduces a new policy, Look East.
The policy was an attempt to emulate the successes of South Korea and Japan in terms of work practices, in terms of their attitudes, in terms of the efforts at modernization.
Dr. Mahathir's next big idea is on 4 wheels. He realizes that the motor car can be a symbol of both national pride and progress.
Well, many people laugh at the idea that a third world country is going to build a national car, but we have some faith in ourselves. We managed to explain to people. Of course, not many people laugh anymore.
In 1982, Mahathir launches the National Car Project, which he hopes will galvanize Malaysia's economy. But Malaysia can't quite go it alone yet, so a deal is brokered with Mitsubishi, the Japanese manufacturing giant. The child of this union is the Proton Saga, launched on 10th July 1985.
Ever since Proton was introduced, usage of car has increased very much.
The problem is that Malaysia has very few decent roads for the new car owners. The road network is practically unchanged since independence.
I used to drive from Singapore to Alor when I was a student, and the roads were terrible, and I thought that we need to improve the roads.
Just 1 month after the Proton Saga makes its debut, Dr. Mahathir officially opens the first road link between Penang and the mainland by driving the national car across the new bridge. In less than a decade, the Prime Minister's passion for cars and highways transforms Malaysia. A network of multi-lane highways connects once remote parts of the nation, slashing journey times from Johor Bahru in the south to Dr. Mahathir's hometown of Alor Setar in the north. Other innovative industries also boot up, especially electronics and microchips. Malaysia has become an exporter of high-tech products, not just the old staples of rubber and tin. An Asian tiger has found its roar. This new spirit finds a voice in Sudirman, who becomes famous as the Malaysian Elvis.
Setiap satu-satu konsert tu dia buat, dia lain daripada yang lain. Maksudnya kalau dia buat satu tu hal tu, ini dia cara coraknya. Pergi yang lagi satu pula, lain pula corak dia. Jadi apabila orang tengok Sudirman ni, dia tengok, Sudirman ni banyak idea dah.
He styled himself. He saw other people, but he would turn it around and make it look uniquely his.
On 15th April 1986, Sudirman, at the height of his fame, staged an open-air concert at Chowkit Road in the middle of Kuala Lumpur.
Jadi apabila dia bawa ke Chowkit, dia buat lagu Chowkit Road tu, dia pakai pula bendera Malaysia tu berdiri atas itu, orang semua bangga, kagum, cukup meriah. Orang ramai, sampai kita nak berjalan pun tak dapat.
It's a Monday night. Can you beat that? You know, and you're talking about 100,000 people coming. For the entertainment milestone, that will go down in the annals of our history books.
The energy of Sudirman's concerts revealed that Malaysia was changing fast. But what kind of future should this nation embrace? To focus this question, the Prime Minister develops what he calls Vision 2020.
He's the father of modern Malaysia, you know what I mean, because he had great ideas for the country. He had a vision of what the country is supposed to be. He wanted Malaysia to be a developed country.
Mahathir wants Malaysia to make the leap into economic, scientific and technological modernity, a country with a new level of sophistication while preserving Asian values. One of the first expressions of this commitment to the future is the launch of Miasat in 1996. Malaysia takes a giant leap forward in the field of regional and global telecommunications. Astro, a new pay television service, starts broadcasting with 22 television stations. Today, it has more than 150. Like Tunku Abdul Rahman in 1963, but on a much grander scale, Mahathir calls for new buildings and monuments to symbolize the new Malaysian tiger.
They are not just symbols, they are really necessities. And that is why we spend quite a lot of money building needed infrastructure, new ports, new airports, new highways, power supply and the like. And they were built big because all were planned for the future, not just for the present.
But the most iconic new building of this new era rises from the very heart of Kuala Lumpur. The Twin Towers is designed by skyscraper specialist Caesar Pelli, but the Prime Minister is closely involved right from the beginning.
The Petronas Twin Towers was a huge icon for Kuala Lumpur. Not only internally, where people felt that it was a new phase of development, but being the world's tallest towers at that time, it brought to attention architecture in Malaysia for the global audience.
It looked like rockets, you know, and I could always create some, stories about that with the Prime Minister there looking at it and asking what happens if there's a congestion, traffic congestion, what can we do? So he just pressed one button and up flew the Twin Towers.
Today, the Petronas Twin Towers are the most celebrated and familiar symbol of Malaysia. But as the towers near completion, thunderclouds gather over the overheated economies of Southeast Asia. 1997 will be a catastrophic year for Asian nations. In July, the Southeast Asian economies are suddenly in freefall, and Malaysia is clearly heading towards a recession. Many companies in the country are going bankrupt. Construction sites become ghost towns.
The economy was tanking. Every macroeconomic indicator was down. As a result of which, total demand in the economy fell by something like 36%. Mahathir was worried.
During that time, we really suffered. I personally feel very troubled, very much trouble.
Worse is to come in the shape of a currency crisis. The ringgit falls by almost 50% against the dollar, and the stock market loses over 65% of its capitalization, wiping almost $225 billion off share values. Nations in trouble like this are often forced to turn to the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, for assistance.
By then, the Thai currency crisis hit, Korean crisis hit, followed, and then Indonesia. All of them went on IMF programs. We are next on the list.
The IMF recommends austerity, cutbacks.
I had to think how to manage this problem. Of course, the easy way out would be to just submit to the IMF and the World Bank. And when we studied their proposals, we found that they were negative. They would just make things more difficult for us. We would be poorer.
Although his deputy and Minister of Finance, Anwar Ibrahim, argues for letting the IMF sort out the problem, Mahathir stands firm.
Huge powwow with Mahathir. Mahathir says, No way. Doesn't make sense. One size don't fit all.
So we decided we must find a way and we must stop this currency depreciation due to currency trading.
For the first time in history, the Malaysian ringgit is pegged to the US dollar, preventing further speculation. It will take some time for this new economic policy to pay off, and national morale is still at a low. But there's a show to put on, for Malaysia has been chosen to host the 16th Commonwealth Games. After 6 years of hard work, Malaysia puts on the biggest sporting extravaganza ever staged in the country, which opens in spectacular fashion. People need an uplift, and at least 100,000 cram into the new national stadium, and a record of 800 million television viewers tune in worldwide.
Coming out at the opening night of the ceremony, it was an amazing feeling because it was a home ground thing and there was just so many people supporting us, just cheering out on us, and it was amazing, it was amazing.
Felt great because I was driven around the track on an open jeep and people were cheering, they were really enthusiastic about the whole thing. All the stands, more than 40,000, 50,000 people were there. They were cheering all the way. And it was, I think, one of the greatest moments in my life, driving around the track on the opening night.
So even in the midst of crisis, Malaysia ends the millennium on a high note. And in the new century, Malaysians will look ahead to new frontiers of achievement. Malaysia welcomes the new millennium in a spirit of optimism. The economy rebounds strongly and the country is back on track. Malaysia's longest-serving Prime Minister, Dr. Mahathir, always insisted that it was not enough to build roads and bridges. A new generation has to be inspired to make a contribution. They will be the soul of development, 21st century Malaysians. It is a Malaysian singer called Siti Nurhaliza who expressed this ideal. A kampung girl, Siti launched her career in 1996 and has since won countless awards.
Saya tak sangka penerimaan masyarakat begitu baik terhadap saya dan saya bersyukur perjalanan saya begitu baik sekali. Saya menang dari tahun ke tahun sehinggalah sekarang saya masih diterima oleh peminat dan juga seluruh pencinta muzik tanah air.
Siti has not just made waves as a singer, she is also a businesswoman and entrepreneur. She is the spirit of a fast-developing Asian nation.
Saya bangga untuk mengatakan bahawa saya bermula sebagai seorang gadis kampung dan berjaya membawa nama Malaysia ke luar negara, dan kini saya ingin mengajak lebih ramai lagi wanita di luar sana ataupun mereka yang berasal dari desa untuk berjaya dan pergi ke level yang lebih tinggi.
But in June 2002, there's a fresh shock. After 22 years in office, Dr. Mahathir unexpectedly announces his resignation.
Saya ingin mengambil kesempatan ini untuk mengumumkan satu, peletakan jawatan saya sebagai Presiden UMNO dan semua jawatan-jawatan yang dipegang oleh saya dapat.
Dr. Mahathir has served for more than 2 decades as Malaysia's Prime Minister. His emotional resignation is a profound shock to Malaysians. Many wonder what the future holds.
No, I have decided.
Dr. Mahathir will leave office fully a year after making his shattering announcement. He hopes to ensure a smooth transition for his deputy, Abdullah Badawi, who continues to hold up the torch of development. When he finally assumes power, Prime Minister Badawi quickly makes his mark. he pushes forward a big engineering project that was close to the heart of his predecessor. This is the world's first combined traffic and storm water tunnel. Drilled through some of the most difficult underground terrain in the world, the tunnel is a first megastructure of its kind. The completed smart tunnel is a triumph for a new generation of Malaysian engineers. And it is not surprising that some Malaysians are confident enough to reach for the stars.
Every child dreams of wanting to go to space. I remember at that time when I was about 10 years old, I remember looking up to the stars, looking up to the skies, wanting to know what is life out there.
In 2007, space becomes the next frontier for Malaysia. After successfully completing his training at Star City in Moscow, Surgeon Sheikh Muzaffar is selected as a fully fledged cosmonaut. He takes his place on the Soyuz TMA-11 mission to the International Space Station.
I was in space on the 10th of October 2007. It was the most magical, spectacular moment of my life. I didn't want to come back. I wish I could stay much, much longer in space. It was the best moment of my life.
Sheikh Muzaffar is not a space tourist. On board the ISS, he carries out important medical research. But what he remembers best today is the mind-expanding experience of space, the final frontier.
Most of the time when people go to sleep, I would quietly sneak up and from my bed and go to the window, just sitting there, just looking at outside through the window and seeing how beautiful it is, looking up to how small and how tiny the Earth is. I get goosebumps. All my hair, my body all goes up. My heart doesn't beat. My eyes doesn't blink, looking at how beautiful, how magical the Earth is. And it made you realize that we are actually insignificant. We live in a very small, tiny Earth. And it's very important for you to see the greater picture. I do hope that Malaysia will have more astronauts as time goes by.
More recently, singer Yuna is making waves in the independent music scenes in the United States with her sultry jazz-influenced style.
I was always looking for that opportunity overseas. In America, people are curious about where you're from, so I enjoy educating people about, oh, I'm Malaysian, and they're like, wow, that sounds so magical, where is that?
Yuna writes and sings in Malay and English and has captured a huge international audience.
Maybe my music could mean something, to people out there. Maybe they could relate to this Malaysian girl, that would be so cool.
A recent high point for Yuna is performing on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno in America.
It was, me being a little bit panicky and nervous about being on Jay Leno. It was because I knew that, oh, okay, it's finally happening for me. So, yeah, it was a lot of fun.
In 2009, as the world starts listening to Yuna, Malaysia has a new Prime Minister, Dato Sri Najib Razak. He follows in his father Tun Razak's footsteps to push Malaysia further into the 21st century.
I had to bear in mind that I was carrying a heavy responsibility. I didn't want to let down my father's memories, but I felt I could continue. I was prepared to make that contribution.
Malaysia is still a youthful nation, and the journey has just begun. Since its foundation, Malaysia has struggled to weave an intricate tapestry of ethnicities and ways of life. But diversity is the foundation of the nation's future.
Negara itu kekuatannya adalah kerana rakyatnya juga. Walaupun kita hidup berbilang bangsa, kaum, agama, saya rasa itu keistimewaan Malaysia berbanding dengan negara-negara yang lain, dan kita seharusnya menjaga keamanan yang ada ni.
If you compare to when we started and where we are today, over the last 50 years, the journey has been quite remarkable, especially if you consider things that could have gone wrong.
All Malaysians have a hand in the future.
It's Malaysia. It is really special. Young people must get together and get to know each other and learn from each other.
It's a long journey, it's a process, but we must continue that. And we must make it even better. My generation must make it better than previous generation, and likewise, the next generation must take it to greater heights.